Good morning. It's really great. Gosh, it's lots of SCTE things and great for the audience here. So, right. SCTE across the pond. So, I tried to, well, this is a quick Technetix. We've got presence in 20 countries. In fact, we're about, the thing that's interesting about us to be able to comment on this is that about half our business is in North America, Latin America, mainly North America, and half of our business is in Europe. So we've got quite a good insight on what's going on in the world. It's interesting when you look at the world in terms of the leading technologies, and still in North America, cable broadband is still by far the leading technology. It's just under 60% of homes are fed by HFC broadband. And in fact, it went up from about 56% to 60% during COVID. And the main reason was because there was a sort of mix between telco, XDSL and broadband, because US historically hasn't had that much competition. It's either telco, DSL or broadband. But when lots of people were working from home, a sort of 30 to 50 megabit max DSL connection, which is all right for streaming video, is just not good enough for with all its latency issues, etc., and for video calls. Latin America, on the other hand, has got a lot of small competition from fibre operators. So all the cable operators are very quickly starting to go to fibre, mainly GPON, because GPON is good enough, and the cable guys have been generally using DOCSIS 3.0 instead of 3.1, and the main reason is the CPE cost is much lower. So it's a very different ARPU market. While Northern Europe, all the fibre rollouts generally are XGS-PON. There are some GPON, but I think all the new rollouts are XGS-PON, the 10 gig style of fibre. Southern Europe still has a lot of GPON. And then if you start looking around Africa, China, it's all GPON. And there's a lot of talk about faster, but a lot of that faster is to feed MDUs rather than feed individual homes. And then the more developed countries like Australia, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, is XGS-PON, 10 gig. So the market is changing, and I think the interesting thing that's happening certainly in the market is fixed wireless access is becoming also a major part to play in broadband. And if you're a cable broadband provider, you've sort of got fixed wireless access attacking at the bottom, at the low end, and you've got fibre, which is the more sexier technology in the way people perceive it, attacking at the top end. So what I'm trying to do is compare the two sides of the pond. Many similarities, but many differences. Oops, I'm sorry about that. Oh, sorry, I will switch off my phone. Sorry about that. So, in terms of USA, Canada, DOCSIS HFC broadband is still holding its own. It's probably losing connections in terms of something like 1 to 2% per year. So it's a very slow melting ice cube. Still lots of opportunity, and no sign that it's not going to be a very major player in 20 years' time. And of course, the operators are employing what they call a cap and grow, which is basically upgrading to DOCSIS 3.1 plus, which basically gives you up to 5 OFDM blocks. So it gives you basically the capability to do 8 gig down, 2 up, which basically makes cable competitive with XGS-PON or DOCSIS 4, and DOCSIS 4 gives you even more, more like 10. So everything is about reducing OPEX and stretching the CAPEX, making the upgrades more efficient. And the thing that's happening is that these bandwidth expansions are probably the first time really that operators have touched their outside plant much in the last 20 years. They've done a little bit of node splitting, but actually expansion of bandwidth is something that hasn't been done much, but it's happening in a big way. And then there's an opportunity with wireless wireline integration, and that's where there's a lot of work going on in terms of integrating 5G with the cable system. You probably heard about NROC, which is New Radio over Coax. NR is the 5 gigahertz 5G technology used for mini cells, and potentially Wi-Fi. I mean, my question is that could well be DOCSIS 5, but I won't be quoted on that. Please don't quote that, because DOCSIS 5, I'll get in trouble say that I'm saying what DOCSIS 5 is. I'm just saying could it be? And then in terms of the other technologies, DSL is very much being killed, and particularly fixed wireless access, because fixed wireless access basically does what DSL does. I mean, in most areas, because it's very large areas, in most areas of the US, if you're out in the suburban areas, you're lucky to get 10 megabits. It's a bit like being in the UK, where I live in Sussex. 10 megabits is, you pray for 10 megabits apart from Mondays and Fridays, when everyone's at home doing their conference calls. So, and then obviously FTTX is really starting to get going, probably a few years behind what's happening in Europe, but most are doing XGS-PON. Some of the cable operators are doing EPON, mainly because of compatibility on provisioning. But certainly the work we're doing in that area is about optimizing CAPEX, and one of the difficulties with fibre is actually getting into every building. Great thing about FWA is no install, fixed position mobile. Suits young people, particularly that are roaming from one rented house to another, because you just move the broadband with you. In terms of moving broadband cable, the thing that's happening in the US, which is not really happening in Europe, is that all the plant in USA, Canada has got amplifiers and nodes with pluggable modules. So all of the work is basically, for 90%, only where there's damage, the plant is actually being updated with pluggable modules into all the legacy styles, and the same with multitaps. So it's actually very good because it de-skills it, and the key thing is that all of the vendors in the market are doing automatic alignment, automatic setup with built-in tests. So it's very much de-skilled and improved the productivity. FTTX, there's a lot of construction in greenfield areas, and a little bit of overlay, mainly in MDUs where there's competition. MDUs is sort of the softer underbelly of cable, and that's where cable has to do what are quite often described fibre islands, where you just drop in an remote OLT just in a building. and that's really cable's way of competing, and it allows operators to put in fibre, especially where you've got new developments in the middle of brownfield networks. Fibre is a sexy thing. You've got to do fibre, and the thing that is pretty well very combined between Europe and North America is it's very, very similar to the early days of cable, where it was connections. Everything was get those connections. Now there's some horrible accountants actually counting up the money, and there are a lot of issues getting into buildings, especially MDUs, but also a lot of houses, just crossing the threshold. And to the extent that in quite a lot of situations, up to 25% of the houses passed have not been connected. It's sort of in the too difficult pile. So a lot of technologies are being worked on to address those issues. Mini ROLTs, we're seeing great demand for that, and especially for overlay. So, the alternative to updating to DOCSIS 3.1, DOCSIS 4 is to hold on the cable technology and overlay with fibre. And effectively, the way broadband capacity works, it's something like 80-20 rule. 80% of the capacity is used by 20% of the customers. So the argument is move 10 to 20% of the customers over onto fibre. That gives them very much better service, and it also enhances the service for the other 80% of customers that are still on cable. So you don't have the cost of changing over. And then you can let the HFC wither on the vine. But the withering can be over 10 to 20 years, so don't think cable's over yet. It's definitely not over. As I said, fixed wireless access, and I didn't mention low Earth orbit satellites. Low Earth orbit satellites are becoming present. As you, I'm sure, know, there's Kuiper and Mr. SpaceX and Starlink. Yes, that's right. Yes, although most Americans describe it as frontier because in high density areas it can't really give the capacity, but it's still a very, very good solution for low density population. So moving on to Europe, Europe is a little bit different. Cable is definitely going to be declining much faster than it is in North America, and that's mainly because we've got denser population centres and a lot of investment in fibre. DSL likewise is being killed by all of the things because 10 to 50 megabits isn't good enough for anyone anymore. So FTTX is definitely the technology. A little bit of FWA, but it's not so good coverage compared with the US. So DOCSIS 3.1 will still retain for a long period, but capacity handoff is very, very common, where doing this 20% off onto the fibre and rip out and replace to fibre. No signs of wireless wireline integration at the moment. We've discussed it with lots of operators, but at the moment I think they're staying separate. DSL's still alive. It'll probably be still there, 20% of the market for guys that don't want to do conference calls and just want to download things. But FTTX is really the big thing, and a lot of markets like UK, where we've got over 200 altnets. Germany, where also large investments. Southern Europe, where the telcos invested earlier on in fibre because the regulatory situation has allowed them to. So very, very different compared with North America. But the technology between the two is very, very similar. In Europe, DOCSIS 4 technology, there's a couple of countries where that is happening, where there's no ducts, and but it's difficult for cable technology, I would say. Construction of FTTX is everywhere, but now the focus on cost and addressing the can't-do homes, as I would call them. Lots of interest in mini ROLTs. The advantage of ROLTs is you don't have to put a great big 90-inch rack, 4 foot, 6 foot high. You know, it's very difficult to get planning permission to put a great lump of equipment, but an ROLT you can mount it on the wall, be it inside or outside or on a pole. And you can do what one of our customers call Ninja network rollout. You don't have to talk to anyone, you just do it. LEO, fixed wireless access is a threat in selected markets. There's some specific European countries like Austria where it's quite big, but generally it's quite small. And LEO, there's certainly some presence, but again, because of the density, it's, I think, not as significant. So if we're talking about across the pond, I thought I'd just put in a little bit of across the pond, a little bit south, LATAM. LATAM is very interesting in that it's more like Europe. DSL is dying very quickly. Everything is FTTX, and HFC is declining quite quickly. Some DOCSIS 3.1 upgrades, we've seen it in, say, Brazil, but it's a sort of wither on the vine policy. 5 years sexier. No wireless wireline integration. I think there's more likelihood of that happening in Latin America, but DSL not dying quick enough. They still have what we used to call the forgotten third, the third of people like me who can't get decent broadband, and somebody will remember us one day. Actually, I seem to have messed up my slides there, but it's GPON everywhere in Latin America, and just XGS-PON for business to business. Some fixed wireless access, but not very much penetration. So certainly we're seeing some markets working towards DOCSIS 3.1, because effectively Latin America is sort of moving from a general speed of 20 to 100 megabits to maybe 500 megabits, but 200 megabits, but not really at the same speed because everything was all about cost. But FTTX is everywhere, and we're seeing a lot of remote OLTs because it's all MDU. Most markets are MDUs. So that's everything. Is it questions now or?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay, all right, thank you.
It's easy when things are perfectly timed. David, your turn.
My turn. Thank you, Tony. So I'm David Whitehead, for those of you who don't know me. I'm part of the sales team at Harmonic. We're working with broadband operators around Europe to transform their networks through new iterations of cable and fibre. And we're also very, very strong in North America. We're the number one vendor of cable broadband equipment worldwide, and starting to build a similar position in fibre. What I've tried to focus on today is some of the things that are happening in North America and whether we're going to start to see those things in Europe. Some of them we certainly will, but I wanted to really focus about what's happening over there, and then we can use that as part of the discussion and debate for later. So I had 5 points that I just wanted to touch on. First of all, a continued increase in streaming video. And that's one of the, and I'm sure Mark will talk about this later actually, it's one of the big drivers for usage on broadband networks as we all start to look at streaming video sources. As the resolution of video gets increasingly higher, then it puts a much bigger load on broadband services. So just got a slide on the increase in streaming video. One of the things we're starting to see in North America broadband now is a focus on service differentiation through quality of experience. And that's stepping us away from the period we've had for the last 20 years where speed wins. And whoever has the highest speed services has the sexiest offering for customers. That's no longer the case. Speed really isn't the goal now for customers. It's reliability of service, and will that service do something for me that's different to the other service providers? So I've got a couple of slides there. Paul touched on DOCSIS 4, and certainly in North America we're seeing quite a huge push towards DOCSIS 4 amongst large and small operators, and I'll touch on that. We're seeing operator consolidation, and certainly we are seeing that, certainly in the UK industry, but also throughout Europe. And then touching on something that Paul mentioned, the threat of wireless to fixed broadband. So first of all, with streaming video, for the first time in North America, in May of this year, streaming services surpassed traditional broadcast and cable TV. And that's the first time that's ever happened. Now, it may go back slightly the other way as the sports seasons start in North America, because some of those are, on broadcast and cable services exclusively. But for the first time, viewing on streaming services surpassed traditional broadcast. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that's an increasing load on broadband networks for all operators today. So if we look at the numbers, a year previous, streaming was 38% of viewing compared to 50% for the combined broadcast. And since Nielsen started tracking this in 2021, so 4 years ago, we've seen a continual increase in streaming as traditional broadcast services have declined. And as you can see there, streaming's grown about 70%, while cable viewing dropped 39% and traditional broadcast down 21%. And this was the numbers from May of this year. So streaming 44.8% of viewing compared to broadcast and cable coming in at about 44.2%. So again, it's marginal, but again, it's the first time while the data has been tracked that streaming has surpassed traditional broadband. And the concern there for operators is the loading on their broadband networks. And the more the loading, the closer you get to congestion, the more likely you have to segment. As Paul mentioned, maybe offloading some cable subs onto a fibre network if you're fortunate enough to have a parallel deployment. But for those that don't, it means more capacity. And that increased capacity for cable can come with more spectrum on DOCSIS 3.1, the DOCSIS 3.1 Plus technologies that Paul mentioned, and increasingly moving to DOCSIS 4 because there's still an appetite for investment in cable. And I think Paul had on one of his slides Charter's view of the cost of migrating to DOCSIS 4 was about $100 per subscriber connection. And that is very achievable compared to the cost of building a parallel fibre network. On quality of experience, I wanted to highlight something that Comcast have launched in the last couple of months, which is what they call the nation's first ultra-low lag internet experience. And they call out some specific application providers, in this case Meta, Nvidia and Valve. And what Comcast are doing is using a quality of service technique called L4S, low latency, low loss, scalable throughput. What that allows them to do is take packets from the application connected to the broadband service, through the modem, through the cable connection today, it will expand upon over time, and actually maintain that quality of service treatment through the backbone network, ultimately to the service provider. So what the subscriber experiences is a significantly improved quality of experience on the particular applications that are supported by the Comcast service. Now Comcast, fortunately, are big enough that they can push application providers to actually provide the appropriate packet marking so that they can treat it appropriately through the network. But it's something that will benefit other operators over time, because as those applications have the packet marking, then other operators can use the same L4S approach to guarantee quality of service through their networks and through their backbone. And here's an example. These are published figures. There's a link at the top. I'm sure when the slides are shared, you know, people can go and look at those if they like. But for Counter-Strike application, the gaming, what they see is on a loaded network, they see the latency of their low latency packets, the packets that are identified for low latency treatment, running with a similar sort of latency as an idle network. So they're managing to prioritize those high priority packets, segment them into a different queue from the normal queue building traffic, and maintain a very, very low latency. So if you're playing a gaming service, a shooting kind of gaming service, it means you're not being taken out the second you start to play because of your poor latency. You're getting excessively good performance. They also have things like FaceTime on those services. So again, prioritizing video communications, making sure that even on a congested network, you're getting really, really good performance. And the number of applications increases literally on a monthly basis. Again, looking at other services that they've looked at with NVIDIA applications, they're seeing significant reductions in latency when they apply this technology. So really, really measurable improvements that lead to measurable customer quality of experience gains. Oh, wrong way. For those of you who spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, the Comcast lead on this technology is a guy called Jason Livingood, and he often sort of promotes sort of new data points on the success of the service, and interesting comments about latency on other service providers. And here's an example from a couple of weeks ago that he compared the current Comcast ultra-low latency service and the LUL is latency under load. So the latency under load performance that his subscribers are seeing, typically in the classic queue, which is where your queue building traffic goes, around 33 milliseconds. But on the non-queue building L4S treated traffic, down to 18 to 20 milliseconds, close to idle latency. And he compared it with a 5G fixed wireless service, where the bandwidth was very impressive, 500 meg down, 50 meg up. But you look at the latency, and it's in the hundreds of milliseconds. So again, speed, great, tick in the box. Latency, very, very poor. Customer experience when using the kind of applications that need low latency, very poor. So it's a classic example of using quality of experience to differentiate your services. Comcast currently have about 7 million homes in their footprint running this capability, and they increase that on a weekly basis. And it really is a big part of their advertising now, that quality of experience differentiates their service offering compared to other operators in the space. So I mentioned DOCSIS 4 earlier. DOCSIS 4 has been around for a couple of years now. There are always two flavors of DOCSIS 4. Full duplex DOCSIS that use the spectrum up to 1.2 gig and shared spectrum between downstream and upstream traffic, and then extended spectrum DOCSIS that extended the high end of the spectrum to 1.8 gig and gave more upstream capability. And historically, if we go back a year, those two technologies were only available to operators who paid for a joint development agreement with Broadcom, the silicon vendor. And typically that was a large upfront payment, and that gave you access to the silicon. You'd choose a vendor such as ourselves or Vecima or CommScope or whoever to develop the solutions for you, and that gave you access to DOCSIS 4 for your customer base. That was a huge barrier to entry for all but the largest operators. I think we had one operator in Europe that had a joint development agreement, and maybe 3-4 in North America. And it really was a huge barrier to entry. But at the SCTE event in sort of Q3, Q4 of last year, Broadcom, along with Charter and Comcast, announced what they call DOCSIS 4 for all, and it basically combined those two technologies of extended spectrum and full duplex DOCSIS into a single unified standard that gave more capabilities, but more importantly, opened the technology to anybody in the industry. So it gave us some improved capabilities. Full duplex, as I mentioned, used the spectrum to 1.2 gig and a shared frequency band for downstream and upstream. Frequency division DOCSIS, or extended spectrum, took the scope up to 1.8 gig. Now, combining the two technologies, we get even more capability. So full duplex now can operate up to 1.8 gig, so expanding the capability if you're running full duplex. Extended spectrum runs as normal, but now because of the diplexerless approach and echo cancellation within full duplex DOCSIS, we can apply that diplexerless technique to extended spectrum and actually run diplexerless, so we don't need a carve out in the spectrum to handle the frequency roll-offs. We can directly put upstream and downstream channels adjacent to each other in a diplexerless approach to extended spectrum. So the combined technology gives significant improvements in throughput. We were demonstrating at the ANGA event a month ago, just over 13 gig in the downstream. And what that means for a cable operator is you can provide true 10 gig services. If you've got a fiber provider with XGS-PON, you're looking at around 8 gig symmetrical. 13 gig in the downstream can allow you to do a true 10 gig service and really start to differentiate on speed, as well as having the quality of experience kind of approaches that we spoke about earlier. And interestingly, this has opened up now to smaller operators. So we had an announcement from MediaCom in the US yesterday that they'll be deploying DOCSIS 4 technology to their customers in the Midwest of the US. And that's great. It's showing that it's open to more than just the big 2, 3 or 4 operators. Within Europe, we're seeing the same kind of approach from even small city carriers, that DOCSIS 4 is genuinely interesting to them and something that they want to deploy going forwards. And just lowering that barrier, allowing everybody to partake in the technology, gives a little bit more life to cable than perhaps there was a year ago. Bit about operator consolidation, and again we're seeing a lot of that certainly in the UK market at the moment as those fibre providers who build hundreds of thousands of homes passed but fail to connect any to customers suddenly get bought out and merged or whatever. We've seen large ones, so Charter and Cox was the big announcement a couple of weeks ago now, but we're also seeing smaller ones. So Midco, one of the smaller operators, bought Savage Communications in June. So we're seeing consolidation on the large side and on the small side of North American cable and telco. And then Paul touched on the threat of wireless to fixed broadband, and it's seen as the new cord cutting threat in North America. So cord cutting has historically meant you're finally turning off your cable TV service and moving over exclusively to streaming. Well, cord cutting now can also mean broadband. And if you look at the projections, the number of homes connecting to fixed wireless access in North America is increasing quite aggressively. In 2024, we see over 12 million subscribers there connecting to fixed wireless. Paul called out, for young people who are moving between rental properties, fixed wireless really is a genuinely perfectly acceptable way of getting your broadband service. With 5G now, the speeds are pretty impressive. Whether they can run the services you want, if you're a gamer and other such, is another thing entirely. But for standard broadband usage, it can be more than acceptable. In addition to that, earlier this year, the Trump administration released new rules for what qualifies for broadband investment from the US government. So there's a scheme called BEAD, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, and that's typically funded fibre deployments in North America. But miraculously, and who knows why, the rules were suddenly changed to accommodate wireless technologies such as Starlink. Don't know how that influence came, but I'm sure it was entirely valid and reasonable. But the interesting point is when you look at the availability of Starlink in North America, it's patchy at best. So the rules for broadband speeds in North America to be termed broadband and to be valid for that kind of government investment is you have to provide 100 megabits per second downstream, 20 megabits per second upstream. There is a belief that will change and go higher in the very near future. But if you look, there are some states where a decent proportion of Starlink customers actually do manage to receive those kind of throughputs. So we're showing South Dakota there, down to Massachusetts. All over 30% of Starlink subscribers can get that kind of throughput. If, however, you live in Alaska, Arkansas, Florida, it's down below 10%. So it's not the answer that everyone would hope to connecting everyone to broadband. There's also a questionable note about latency on Starlink services. I don't know, is anybody a Starlink subscriber in the room? And how is latency?
It's good, actually.
I
was a DSL person before, and Starlink has changed my life.
35 for me.
Okay.
Milliseconds.
That's good. Many other people on it in your area, I suppose, is the question.
Probably not.
Well, yeah, and that's probably part of the point, I think. But anyway, so it's interesting. It's being helped in terms of a deployment model in North America, but sometimes the reality doesn't quite meet up to exactly what people are looking for. That's what I wanted to touch on. I wanted to focus on the things that are happening in North America and how they apply to what we're doing here, hopefully for some good discussion later. But thank you.
You had to get that one in about Starlink. Well done. Mark, your turn.
Sir.
Okay. So I'm going to take a little different approach here. I don't want to be repetitive with what these guys have said. I totally agree with all of the messages that they've put out there about what's happening in the Americas. I'm going to share a little bit of data though, and how our observations of what's going on in North America differ from what we see in Europe, because I think it helps inform us as to where things are going and what's going to be happening here in Europe in terms of traffic volumes and things like that. But just a little bit about us for those that don't know. Founded the company in 2010, headquartered right outside of New York. We collect just billions of data records for everything from subscriber usage to network health type data, and aggregate all that data and apply deep domain expertise so that we can create what we call actionable solutions, right? So it's a combination of kind of, we like to say we borrow your watch and tell you what time it is, as far as our data and our analytics, but it's what you do with the data that's really most important. And can you create applications and software that can create actions on the network in an automated way that really reduce, again, the OpEx and things that Paul talked about. All operators are focused on reducing their OpEx. We talk about, new technicians coming into the market and such that maybe aren't as educated. So how do we apply things like AI to help educate them and bring them up to speed faster? So we'll talk about a little bit of that, but everything that we do is around really improving network performance. And we hear quality of experience, quality of experience, quality of experience. Well, that starts with quality of your network, right? If your network is not healthy, if it's not clean, it's really difficult to provide an overall high quality experience for subscribers. So again, everything that these guys were saying, I totally agree with. The days of speed being a competitive edge are over, at least for the time being. I don't think that's going to last forever. But I think that operators have done a great job of, I'll say, future-proofing their networks for a little bit, creating enough headroom where speed is no longer really too much of an issue, provided the network is healthy. So So that's just a little bit about us, some of our customers, just to, again, to give you a better feel. We started our business really focused on the tier 2, tier 3 marketplace, and it was a great way for a small startup to start a business because, you know, a lot of large operators are roll-ups of a number of tier 2 and tier 3 operators. So we gained a lot of experience through that process, and that allowed us to hone our messaging and then take that to the tier 1 marketplace, where we've had a lot of recent success with some of our newer products, which I'll talk about. But again, we've been collecting data, aggregating it, and a few years ago we started putting out a report that we call our OVBI, OpenVault Broadband Insights Report. Some of you may have seen it. If not, you can get it on our website. We put it out once a quarter. And what we realized is there's such a thirst for some key statistics in the industry. Things like just simply usage per household. How many gigabytes are being consumed? What's the average provision speed? How many power users are there? These types of things that are really important for operators to understand as well. You know, Paul brought up 80% of usage comes from 20% of subscribers. I would say in general that's true, but at peak times we see 99 to 1 sometimes, right? Where 1% of subscribers are causing issues for everybody else on a given node. So it's really important to look at a very granular level at the data so that you could take the proper action, right? We have many operators that, you know, DOCSIS operators in the States that just split nodes all day long because they see congestion on a given node, on a given service group. The reality is there might be one subscriber causing issues all the time. So that node split isn't really going to do anything. You're just wasting what costs about $20,000 to $30,000 of expense to split that node. So again, understanding the root cause of issues is where operators really need to focus, and we're seeing a lot of that in the States. So this report that I mentioned, you know, which we put out once a quarter, has kind of become the system of record, which we're very proud of for a lot of the publications and industry analysts and such in the space, some of it which you see there. And it's simply because I think we were probably the first ones to put out that type of data. And I'm going to share a little bit with you and again talk about how things are a little bit different in the Americas than what we see here in Europe. So what you're seeing on the upper left is average and median usage per subscriber for the last 7 years, I guess. The graph doesn't really do it justice, but we saw our highest usage spike in 2020, probably not a surprise. Work from home, school from home, etc. Became the norm in 2020. But as you can see, usage never reverted to pre-pandemic levels. So it's continued to rise. In fact, and again, you can't really see it from that chart, but it started to accelerate again this past quarter, quarter over quarter, year over year. So the benefit of kind of having all this data over time is you can get pretty predictive as to where things are going, right? But that's just average usage. So again, that's important, but operators build their network to support peak usage, right? And peak volume. So that's important. This on the bottom left is a scary chart here. This represents what we call power users. You know, when we started this business, 250 gigabytes was a super power user 15 years ago. Now the average is almost 700 gigabytes per household. We see about a third of all subscribers, consuming over a terabyte now of usage. Bless you. And now we started tracking. We keep changing the definition. We went from 250 gigabytes as a power user. Now it's a terabyte. And now, we have a super power user category of 2 terabytes, and we started tracking what we call the real extreme power users, those that are 5 terabytes or more. Every operator, if there's operators here in the room, you probably all have that subscriber consumes about 35 terabytes in a given month, right? And they're probably reselling the service. Who knows what they're doing? So shining a light on those subscribers can really help you manage your network much more efficiently. So that's kind of some areas that we help operators with. Now on the right, the other thing that we see is continued uplift in speeds, right? So now we're seeing here in this last quarter, you're seeing a massive amount of subscribers here, 40% or so, that are provisioned at 500 megabits per second or greater. So one of the things that we see in Europe, particularly with the DOCSIS operators, and I hate to generalize because obviously every country is different, every operator is different. But in general, we still see a lot of subscribers that are provisioned at 100 megabits per second, 200 megabits per second. And whereas in the States, operators have often pushed subscribers into the faster speeds automatically, not requiring more money or anything, just saying, hey, we want to provide a better service for our customers. We're going to automatically uplift everybody to the faster speeds. The reason I bring this up is over time in the States, what we've seen is there's been a strong correlation between speed and usage, right? As subscribers move up to faster speeds, they don't even have to change their usage behavior to consume more gigabytes because now higher quality streaming video is being served up, right? So they're still watching the same movie, but they're chewing up more gigabytes. So that correlation is something that the European market, I think, needs to be aware of. We see the usage profile of a lot of customers in Europe being about half that of what we see in the States in terms of total volume per household, right? We just looked at one of our larger customers here. The average usage was about 330 gigabytes. That's where the average US household was in 2019. And so the theory there is adoption of streaming video, cord cutting, the traditional definition of cord cutting, right? Just getting rid of traditional video and consuming all your content over the broadband pipe. That's very, very popular in the States, and it's driven a lot of usage. So I think the reason that's important is it helps our European operators understand where things are headed from a volume perspective, right? And what also will happen as they offer and push subscribers into those higher speeds. So while there's traditionally been a strong correlation between speed and usage, what we're seeing now is because so many subscribers in the States are at 500 megabits or higher, there's not much of a correlation anymore. They have more headroom than they need, more bandwidth than they need. So you're not seeing that correlation as much as you would when you go from those lower bandwidth plans to the higher ones. So this is not a commercial. This is just to explain how some of the shifts in the market have informed our product strategy. Before COVID, we collect all this data. Operators wanted to monetize that, right? How can we drive more revenue and align growing demand on our network with growing revenues? So things like usage quotas and what we call usage-based billing were very, very popular. When COVID came around, operators did not want to be in the news for the wrong reasons, by holding people back, by charging them a lot more money for such an essential service. So many of our customers relaxed those plans and never actually re-implemented them. So the shift for us as a business went from focusing on that area, we had to move to, we also had a network health focus, so we really leaned into that part of our business, knowing that was going to be customer, operator, the resiliency of your network, the reliability of your network, capacity management. Those were going to be the things that operators were really going to be focused on in the coming years. So I bring that up because that actually informed a couple of acquisitions that we recently did, and also our recently announced Vantage platform, which integrates proactive network maintenance with our profile management application, PMA, as well as our congestion management solution, which effectively handles what we talked about earlier, where that when that one subscriber is causing issues for 300 others on a given node, all 300 of those subscribers are effectively throttled, right? They're not getting the service that they're paying for. So with very, very granular analytics and the ability to take bandwidth down on one customer, you can open up the pipe for everybody else. So these are things that a lot of operators are interested in, because they have a right to manage their network. Their job is to provide the best quality of service for the most subscribers possible. So there's a lot of focus on that as well. Lots of benefits. Again, operational stuff we talked about. I won't get into all that. I wanted to take a little different approach since I knew these guys were going to talk DOCSIS 3.0, 3.1, 4.0, GPON, XGS-PON. I figured I'd take the data approach. So thank you.
You finished ahead of time. Perfect. Look at that.
So now we'll get to you, Mike, and then it's question time afterwards. So start preparing your questions, because we're going to need them. And then straight after that, we have AJ.
So good morning.
Telephones off, please.
How is everybody? Tony, thanks for the invitation to join the party late. I went to the annual dinner on the Saturday night and noticed there was a slight, factor missing from the perspective of North America. I now work for Vecima Networks. Vecima Networks is a Canadian company, so I thought, okay, let's jump into the fray and see if I can add some flavour from a Canadian perspective. So my name's Mike Gannon. I'm Vice President of Access Architecture and Sales Engineering at Vecima. I lead the sales engineering team globally for what is predominantly a North American and global business. So I've always been trying to influence my North American colleagues in, well, what about Europe? What can we do differently? What are the requirements for Europe? So hopefully I can touch on some of these and perhaps reflect on some of the comments made by all of our previous speakers. So, hands up. Be honest. Who had heard of Vecima before today? Not bad. Not bad at all. As a company, I would say we're probably not as well known in Europe as our market position would perhaps justify. As a company, we're 35 years old. We're headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia. The majority of our engineers and employees, we're a very engineer-focused company, are in the plains of Canada and Saskatoon. And for the longest time, Vecima was a company that was a supplier to the industry. Provided components, provided modules that were integrated either into cable modems at the very beginning of the DOCSIS revolution. Later on, things like block-up converters were integrated into other vendors' CMTSs. So we've been part of the industry for quite a long time and have a lot of expertise in RF and DOCSIS. But as a mainstream provider to the industry, that is something that has kind of grown organically. We introduced our first remote PHY node back in 2017, and we now have tens of thousands of these deployed across North America. We acquired Concurrent for their video streaming technology in 2017. That again enabled the company to grow significantly. And then we acquired Nokia's cable business unit in 2020, where I spent time previously with Nokia and before that with Gainspeed. And latterly, we've acquired Falcon V. And Falcon V are providing us with the ability to, deepen our partnership with Charter. And what are we doing with Falcon V? Falcon V was a company that grew up and have built technology which allows cable operators to scale test CMTSs from all vendors in a way that is necessary. We've moved from chassis-based CMTSs with a small number of line cards to virtualized solutions that support hundreds of RPDs, hundreds of thousands of cable modems. How do we effectively test those platforms? Not only the CMTSs themselves, but the provisioning systems, the operational systems behind that. So Falcon V has enabled us to do that. We're about 600 employees globally, of which 60% are engineers. I'm still one of them, I think, we look forward to talking more to you. Power and connectivity. One of the key focuses from Vecima is very much a customer-focused company, being centered upon the requirements of our customers, where we build solutions that are directly tied to those customer requirements, and that enable us to bring products to market very, very quickly. So where are we, focused? We are share leaders in both fibre and distributed cable access with, significant numbers. Paul mentioned remote OLTs as a talking point. The North American marketplace is subtly different, and often the distances between head ends and consumers vastly exceed what's typical here in Europe. So the ability to use a centralized OLT doesn't apply, because you've got to backhaul that technology over 10 gig Ethernet to a remote OLT solution where it's either serving a community or serving an MDU. Vecima is an equal opportunities arms dealer. We have technology in pretty much all of the DOCSIS front, the remote PHY, remote MAC PHY, EPON, and now XGS-PON. So whatever the appropriate technology is for the customer is what we focus on, together with the professional services that allow you to deliver that company or that technology, along with our video solutions. Pretty much a wide spread of customers globally, serving 100 plus operators globally and over 100 million people. And you can see obviously some very familiar names within that slide. I guess the big news is from our company's point of view, we recently announced that together with Cox Communications that we've signed an exclusive 5-year agreement to provide the largest private broadband provider in the US with virtual CMTS. Our virtual CMTS is a relative newcomer in the marketplace, but it's been built from the ground up to be reliable, interoperable and efficient. And that was done largely through collaboration with our customers, and in this case Cox, to define the platform based upon their requirements. And as we add more customers and more operators globally to testing and implementing this platform, we add more features that are effectively theirs. And I guess together with the announcement from Charter and Cox, who knows what will happen in the long term. We expect to be deployed in the field long before the Charter Cox deal is closed. We touched upon this slightly earlier. Delora Group have named Vecima as a global market share leader in remote fibre OLTs, where we have deployed tens of thousands of remote OLTs. So it's really is a fantastic technology that allows operators to go and drop a solution in, as Paul said, without the need to put a huge outdoor cabinet. These things are they're node sized, and they can fit in either on the fascia of buildings or in distributed cabinets across operators' networks, and that allows us to do that. MAC-PHY, we're still market share leaders in MAC-PHY, and MAC-PHY still remains a very viable proposition for operators to deploy technology. Today, our MAC-PHY nodes support DOCSIS 3.1 plus. I did some testing in my own home lab environment. See, I told you I was an engineer. Recently with the DOCSIS 3.1 plus modem, and I was getting 9.3 gigabits per second in the downstream over networks that exist today and will continue to exist for a long time. So very viable solutions. So to touch on North America, I know David and Paul mentioned some of these. There are multiple, I guess, political programs that are being designed and implemented to allow expansion of broadband, to allow delivery of these networks. The Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF, Universal Broadband Fund in Canada, and the BEAD program that David mentioned earlier, delivering high-speed internet for all. And the recent changes from the Trump administration have allowed the expansion and the focus for BEAD to change perhaps from all fibre, it must be fibre is the best, to allow alternative technologies. And David mentioned Starlink being included in that, but DOCSIS is going to play parts in that, I believe, as the speeds are totally suitable for deployment in BEAD networks. BEAD and BABA, Build America, Buy America. So you'll see this from a number of vendors. This slide indicates a number of vendors, including Vecima, who have moved manufacturing lines for key product lines inside North America to comply with, no one's mentioned tariffs yet, have they?
No.
Tariffs.
All yours, mate.
All mine, okay. Well, it's a reality. So, as Paul will tell you, supply chain is vital to any organisation and being prepared for all eventualities. I remember this being discussed internally at Vecima before the elections last year, and what are we doing to mitigate risks? And obviously building in North America is one option for certain product lines. Moving product into the region ahead of any tariffs was another strategy that was quite popular. But then when you look into the detail, because there is a 25% fentanyl related tariff, and I didn't build these slides, but they're put there. It's very valid, and from the the nicest people in the world in Canada to to mention this. It's quite interesting. But there is an indefinite exemption on US, Mexico and Canadian trade agreement compliant products. So at the end of the day, after all the fuss and all the concern, these don't apply to those existing products. So things carry on. Of course, products that we manufacture internationally in Taiwan and that Vietnam and other places are still subject to the variances of the varying tariffs and implementations by the US. And those were, I guess, my last slides on Vecima. To comment on some of the points that are made by the earlier speakers. I think cable is around. It will be around for some significant period of time. If operators choose to migrate all their existing DOCSIS subscribers to fiber to the home, the resources to do so, to change those subscribers, simply don't exist, both in North America and in Europe. And that means that DOCSIS and cable will be around, I think, for 15 to 20 years, and certainly for as long as I'm working, hopefully. The trends are very similar. It was interesting to see what Mark was saying about global trends. And I looked at my own home broadband usage the other day on my router and see, well, I'm not quite at the US scale, but my home, which is now devoid of 3 teenage boys, so the bandwidth consumption has probably gone down over the last couple of years, to I'm now just under 2 terabytes a month of capacity. And when I think about what behaviour is driving that, it's television, it's over-the-top usage, it's my wife's addiction to Netflix and other such platforms. It's not something that's very common to watch a live TV event or a broadcast event. It's all time shifted, either via satellite, via Sky, or via on-demand platforms. So, those features are there. I also recently put a foot to the other side of the water and got a fibre connection at home. I've been a Virgin Media cable subscriber for since I moved into my home 25 years ago. I now have the 1 terabyte down, 100 megabit per second up tariff, and it's great, it works. But I had a knock on the door 6 months ago from Tube, who are one of the altnets, offering a competitive 900 meg symmetrical service for a quarter of the cost of the Virgin Media service. So it's okay. This is worth a punt. We'll see what the difference is. So I'm still running both services concurrently. They both work very well. How do we progress into the future? I noticed the OLT or the ONU that they provided is a 2.5 gig Ethernet port, so that 900 meg service can go up to a gig, it can go to 2, it can go to 2.5 before they need to do anything. It's really the applications then that are going to drive that usage. What am I going to use in my home that's going to require more than 100 meg cable upstream? What's going to drive the 900 meg symmetrical service from the PON provider I have? That's going to be the interesting thing, and the usage of L4S and the adoption of those technologies is only going to make the broadband experience better for all of us at home. So that's where I'm going to leave the slides. Happy to take any questions.
So why don't we just get some microphones round? Mark, I was actually a little bit interested because you've got a lot of data. How does the data differ in different areas of the world? Is there a lot of difference between it? Sort of usage, how it's working? Are there some quirky things in there?
Yeah, I mean it varies not just from country to country, operator to operator, but geographic area within the operator. It's massively different from place to place, so that's why it's really dangerous to think about and use averages for anything. It takes that granular analysis, I think, to understand the usage profiles, but really what's most important is understanding how individual subscribers can impact the service of everyone else, right? These are all shared networks, no matter what technology is being used as an access network. They're all shared networks. Sure, some have more capacity than others, but there are choke points everywhere. And what can happen is when you do have those superpower users causing issues for others, that can, you really need to understand that that's the issue. instead of going and rolling trucks and technicians out into the field when in fact there's nothing that technician can do. So again, getting to the root cause of issues, whether it's an impairment in the network, whether it's a abusive subscriber, using the network, it's important to shine a light on and have access to that data, ideally, and also have automated solutions in place. So yeah, it varies a lot, which is why no human can actually, this is where AI comes in and machine learning and such, to be able to kind of capture all that data and in real time take action.
Interesting. Paul, you've got a foot in both camps. You're on each side of the pond. What differences do you see? Do you see major differences between how the operators are working in this and how technology is moving?
I think the major difference between cable in North America and Europe is the competition level. Cable in Europe, in Southern Europe, the incumbent telcos have constructed a lot of fibre, and in Northern Europe there's, especially now UK and Germany, there's quite a construction going on of fibre. In North America generally there is some fibre build, but the majority of areas it's telco versus cable co. So cable in North America has far less competition to have to deal with. I think that's the main difference, and therefore the cost. The cost is. One thing between North America and here is broadband connections are much cheaper than in North America, but in North America, cable certainly has a view of another 20 years with, as I said earlier, roughly $100 investment. Fibre cannot construct at that cost. So it's different, but the technology is very similar.
David, you're also in sort of the same area. You've got a foot both sides. So how do you see it?
Well, we're certainly seeing a bigger push towards DOCSIS 4 in North America across the board, but that's not to say there isn't significant interest in Europe amongst, as I mentioned earlier, not only some of the larger operators, but also increasingly some of the smaller ones who have access to the technology and see that as a cost-effective way of isolating themselves from the threat of fibre. Now, by the same degree, we have plenty of operators who are looking at sort of fibre optionality on their existing deployments and looking at sort of new areas and building with fibre, potentially doing some of the subscriber migrations that we talked about earlier. But we see a lot of DOCSIS 4 interest now in Europe that just wasn't there a year ago when there was an absolute barrier to entry.
Definitely. Mike, you hit on one of my sort of pet subjects. It's a word you mentioned pretty quickly, which was EPON. So Ethernet PON. I've been trying to get this into the world that this is really a good thing to use. It's actually quite amazing. Can you explain a little bit just about EPON?
So I guess what are the competing standards? You've got the IEEE, IETF, both with standards that deliver PON, both passive optical networks. Effectively, from a consumer point of view, there is no difference between the two. They both deliver exactly the same headline speed. You'll get about 8.7 gigabits per second out of EPON. You'll get 8.7 gigabits per second out of XGS PON. So where's the difference? We see tremendous usage of EPON in North America, where operators have chosen to utilize their existing provisioning systems, where EPON simply allows them to deploy what is effectively a cable modem. The Enter Access Controller from Vecima just represents an EPON ONU as a cable modem. It's a virtualized cable modem. So from an operational point of view, all the back office systems are exactly the same. Now, is the world going to stay EPON? Probably not. But what we see in North America is operators are now looking to plan the next step, whether they go 25 gig PON, whether they go 50 gig PON, and to align any operational changes with that introduction of technology. We'll be showing at SCTE in September our first 50 gig PON solutions. How long it takes for them to be commercially deployed, who only knows? But, whether it's backhaul, whether it's consumer technology, whether it's shared bandwidth to buildings, the technology certainly is coming. Europe chose to adopt XGS-PON, and that's done for, I guess, a number of operational reasons. One of which is network sharing. XGS-PON and all of the vendors in the XGS-PON space already have solutions that allow for open access networks, which allow them to be the wholesaler for other providers.
It's funny because I've just actually pushed EPON going into sort of the Finland area with Baltics, where it's been running really good.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting.
And I think the other point to make on EPON now is there is a wide range of CPE providers. Going back 4 or 5 years ago, EPON, it was pretty much a closed shop. You bought an EPON system from Nokia, you had to buy their CPE, you had to buy their OLTs. Now, Vecima now supporting about 12 or 15 different vendors in the ONU space.
Oh, there's loads of questions. Well, this is actually a perfect time to put sort of AD up.
Hi. Thinking about cable over the last few years, there's been quite a lot of fragmentation in the industry in terms of different operators doing different things. Do you see unified DOCSIS as a way of generating scale again in the business?
It will definitely generate scale because it's open now to many more operators. They can still choose their DOCSIS 4 technology of choice, whether it's full duplex or extended spectrum, and there's a range of unified amplifiers, unified CPE that allows you to pick and choose your technology on a per deployment basis. But by the same degree, if you want to deploy the extended spectrum flavor of DOCSIS 4, you can go to an existing amplifier vendor, for example, such as yourselves, and buy purely an extended spectrum amplifier if you're happy with just that feature set. So I think it gives more flexibility to the operators. It allows a much wider number of operators to partake in the technology, and more people deploying it brings the cost down. And I think that makes it more interesting for the industry because it makes the migration to DOCSIS 4 more viable for more operators than ever thought it possible a year ago.
Well, I'll just add. The positive thing is actually bringing the world together in one standard, really, which I think is a very, very positive thing, and I think that's the most important thing about unified DOCSIS, and the important thing with the cost of touching a network is every operator only wants to touch their network once, so. If they're going to touch their network, they want to touch their network once with something that's future-proof about all the different developments. So even if an operator's not doing DOCSIS 4 now, if they're going to touch their network to get from 860, 1 gig, 1.2 gig up to 1.8 gig, you touch it once and then you have a system where you're not really locked in to any technology line.
I think for the longest time, the JDA approach really just delayed the deployment of DOCSIS 4, whatever technology, and now we have unified silicon for the amplifiers, for nodes, and for CPE. I think what we're going to see is a very rapid test and deploy marketplace where it's very simple to go from your existing DOCSIS 3.1 network today to a 4.0 network.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give you an observation rather than a question here. So I'm sat here as a double Comcast subscriber.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got Sky here, which is Comcast, and I'm a Comcast subscriber in the US. Actually, it's $45 a month for a Comcast basic broadband connection, which isn't too bad. But when you talk about video streaming, you don't realise how lucky you have it here in the UK when you have something like Sky. And you can get everything on that one platform very easily. In the US, Paul showed how many different streaming services you have to have. And in my US, I have my Comcast basic service. I got rid of their video. I have to have Peacock. I have to have Netflix, have to have Prime, have to have Paramount, have to have HBO, and we'll all still go to the bar in an evening and say, which bloody channel's that NFL game on? And it's the sport that is killing it, because you can't, whereas if you're I won't say soccer, a football fan over here, you can just watch what you want to on Sky easily. You're searching across so many different streaming networks in the US to find the programming you want. It's a nightmare, and that's one of the reasons, to me, there's a lot more streaming having to go on, because of how bad the platforms are in capturing into one place.
I think one thing Sky have done really well is integrating all the apps into their platform, and the fact that you can search through for content and access content through the same really simple user interface. I genuinely still don't think there's anything to match that Sky sort of user experience.
Even though Comcast owns Sky.
There's 2 more over this side, 3. So
thank you very much. Can I just say, first of all, thanks to the panel. So 4 different, quite orthogonal presentations, and I feel like I've got a good overview as a result of that. So really fantastic. Just picking up on one point in particular, if I may. So there's been a couple of people today in particular talking about L4S, which was a new acronym technology for obviously the principle of quality of service over networks is well established. Can I just ask how that plays with net neutrality? If you're giving better service to some services, that means you're giving worse to others. How does that work in terms of net neutrality?
So net neutrality is no longer really a thing in the US. So that's another thing that the Trump administration did pretty early, I think. So it gives more of an opportunity to differentiate. That I don't think we have in quite the same way here. But certainly it gives more flexibility now to operators to prioritise their own services. Whether that's good or bad, I think, remains to be seen, but it's certainly given an opportunity.
I would agree. It remains to be seen. For a long time, there was a feeling in the States that net neutrality was a solution looking for a problem, right? That there really wasn't any issues. I think that this type of prioritization may result in net neutrality becoming not a new, an exciting or important topic again. But yeah, to David's point, it really has gone away, at least in the States, as being a concern, because there really hasn't been any notable situations where prioritization has caused issues in the marketplace. But
one stat that comes to mind was a conversation I had with one large European operator a few years ago. I'll reveal how long ago it was by the statement was, So what's the difference between your packet cable voice, quality of service, and over the top? And he said, well, to be honest, our own internal packet cable voice is about 1% of the Skype traffic that we carry, so it's almost irrelevant. And being able to offer quality of service to other applications now just improves the experience for everybody.
Another thing I'd say, Colin, is the Comcast service today has basically 3 different application service providers that are marking their packets, and that's limiting in some ways. One of the things we showed at Anger in Cologne a couple of weeks ago is a solution from a company called Cujo AI, who have an application that runs on a home gateway and actually can identify traffic that should require low latency treatment and actually do the L4S marking at the gateway, so it can then be treated appropriately through the network. And they have an increasing list of applications, so an operator deploying that technology in their home gateways can start to pick and choose the applications that they want to prioritize through the network, should things like net neutrality allow that kind of approach. But again, it's taking the technology and giving much more control to the operator about what they can prioritize, and then how they market that service and differentiate their service offering from a quality of experience point of view.
Yeah, we're actually a Cujo customer in home. I can test all that fireworks very well. Can I just say, gentlemen, trying to find service on streaming service, can I just plug DVBI? One possible solution there? Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you. Probably most people are aware that Tony and I represent the society on a fair number of committees, and one of them is currently working on DOCSIS 4 and the adaptation of it so it can become a European standard. That sounds great, and that aligns with what you're saying. But I've also heard that some operators in Europe are saying the cost of converting to DOCSIS is so much, it's more economical to run fibre. Mm-hmm. Is that true for the whole of Europe, or just unusual cases?
I think Paul had a point on his slides about if you have a ducted connection into the home, it's easy to get a fibre to the home, and that was one of the things that Virgin particularly promoted when they announced going fibre. But
even in ducts, it's quite difficult because what Virgin have found is, I mean, there's a general ease to be able to do it, but even with ducts, where it's under footways are normally rated for 400 kilos, so one removal lorry every 7 years, I think the average is, and it's sort of a very flat oval shape. So fibre upgrades are quite difficult, and crossing the threshold is a major issue with all of the fibre construction. You asked Virgin about it. It's quite a headache.
So my experience as a recent convert to fibre is they did an aerial build. I was surprised. No ducts used. There were ducts running up and down my street. An aerial build, and I thought, well, that's not going to be very pleasant. Done very neatly. You hardly know it was there. And the access to the property, just come over the top and down the side of the wall. No digging up of people's block pavement driveways.
But you live in the country, don't you?
I'm working.
He's in Woking.
Oh, Woking.
Yeah, suburban.
There was some local resistance to the polls, though.
Thank you.
All right, Adam from Harmonic in the back here. Question to Mark, kind of a doubleheader. The technology for identifying and the top talkers and maybe the abusive subscribers, it sounds cool. What can actually be done once you've identified them? What tools do the operators actually have to address it? Both on DOCSIS and actually on PON, because I guess it's a problem on both sides. And then sort of the second correlating question, or maybe separate question, is David showed the stats on streaming taking over from broadcast television. When that gets to like 90%, 95%, 100%, what does the network look like? Is that new access network